For the past couple of months, I have been very busy rebuilding this crashed Mx-5. This car has really challenged me on so many levels. I have learned a lot and done so many things I have never done before. I have changed the airbags, the dash, the locked out seatbelts, reassembled the front bumper, and those are only to say a few. She is now back on the roads, and I think it is time for some improvements. But before we do any of that, let's just make sure the car is all serviced. Because I bought the car from Copart, I don't actually know when the last servicing was done, and it didn't come with any servicing books or log books, so play it on the safe side. Let's go and get the car serviced. So we'll start with the easiest, which is changing the wipers. These are pretty standard wiper blades. To remove them, you need to pull the wiper forwards, squeeze the wiper blade clip, and then slide down. Put your new ones on, push it up until you hear a click. Pretty straightforward. You should then do the same for the other side. Well, almost. And next, the air filter. Air filter, air filter. I'm only joking. Air filter is here, right here. On the Mx-5, the airbox is kept closed by these two C-clips, which you just pull back to release. Wiggle the old air filter out, check it out for a few minutes, and then wiggle the new one in. Next up are the spark plugs. The coil pack needs to be removed first, which in the Mx-5 is held by a bolt. Remove the coil pack from its electrical connectors and then put aside. The spark plug can now then be loosened using a socket. And then I just used an old rubber coil pack to pull the spark plug out. So this is our old spark plug and this is our new one. Much better. The new ones can now go in and then tighten to spec, which is about 10 to 14 Newton meters for the Mx-5. If it looks like I know what I'm doing, then I must be hiding it well, as I have never actually changed a spark plug before. So if I can do it, I'm sure you definitely can, so don't be afraid of having a go at it yourself. Now it's time for the oil change. I've done oil changes a couple of times now, but never on the Mx-5, though the principles are exactly the same. You first have to drain the old oil. I usually remove the oil filter next, as more of the old oil usually drains out. The old oil filter did put up a fight, but I eventually got it out. There she is, burn of my life, the old oil filter. Took absolutely hours to remove. That is our old oil out. The new oil filter is in and the sun plug is back in as well, so we should now be able to put our new oil in. Make sure you also use a new sun plug washer as well, by the way. I then dropped the car and now we can top up the engine with new oil. The Mx-5 uses about 4.3 litres of oil. Not bad. On my previous video, the front passenger side caliper was actually seasoned. I thought after a couple of miles driving, the seasoning would stop. I have actually taken it off, greased everything, and it is still seasoned. So I ended up getting a new caliper. Here is our new front caliper. Let's get this fitted as well. So this should be spinning freely, but it's not. I've recently found out that this is a common fault for the Mx-5s. The caliper is held by two bolts, one at the top and one at the bottom. I also had to remove the brake line. I used a locking plier on the line to stop brake fluid from draining, and a banjo bolt just needs removing. So that is our old caliper, which is leaking brake fluid everywhere, and that is our new caliper. I've also purchased new banjo bolts and washer for the new caliper. A banjo bolt is a hollow bolt with holes that secure the brake line and also allows brake fluid to flow through to the caliper. Then it was just a matter of reassembling everything back together, and as preventative, I made sure the back of the brake pads are greased, the slider pins and the bolts are also greased. That is now our new caliper in. Look how sexy that is. We're just gonna go and bleed the brakes now because I don't want to die. To bleed the brake system, I started by topping up the brake reservoir first, as you don't want this getting emptied and letting air in the master cylinder. Bleeding in car context means we are letting all of the air out of the system. So to bleed the system then, because I'm by myself, I bought this Oneman Bleeding Kit. I think it's got a one-way valve at the end, and then you attach this to the bleeding nipple and then you just press on the brake. So yeah, this is quite handy and not very expensive as well. So here is our bleeding nipple, and that just goes in there. And the other end goes into something to catch the brake fluid. In my case, a water bottle. And then all you have to do is press the brake until you can't see any more bubbles in the line.
Bruh.
Oh. Because the tube kept coming off, I had to cable tie it to the bleeding nipple and use a string to keep the bottle up. So I'm pretty happy with that, I think. There's no air bubbles in the system. But yeah, pretty good little kit. Then it was just a matter of cleaning up the brake fluid residues as it is highly corrosive. Tightening the bleeder bolt and then putting everything back. What else is there left to do other than to test it out? So I've just put some blocks of wood here just in case the car doesn't stop. So hopefully those blocks of wood will stop the car from going any further. Hopefully we should be fine. Not that I don't trust it at all, but yeah, we should be fine. Great success! And finally, it is now time for some modifications. So I thought the first thing that we need to deal with are these wheel gaps. I mean, I've got small hands, but that's too much. Yeah. So I went and got myself some lowering springs from good old eBay. Look how nice these are. I mean, these are just some cheap ones. I think the company is called Low Sport Suspensions. These were about £110, not too bad. Coilovers would have been absolutely preferred, but the budget does not cover coilovers, unfortunately. These springs should lower the car by 35mm, enough to hopefully store the wide wheel arch gaps. To remove the front suspension, as far as I'm aware, all we need to do is remove the link arm so that we can angle this whole thing to allow us to take the suspension out. I began by loosening the lower suspension bolt, well, tried to. As expected, with the 2010 Mx-5, which probably never had the suspension changed, all the bolts are seized up. I've been in for about 30 minutes just trying to fight with the bolts and nothing is coming loose. I'm going to be here the whole afternoon. So I called the help of the magic liquid that is the WD-40 and the Ugga gun, and that seemed to have done the trick. Yee! Made progress! I left that bolt loose for now and then moved on to removing the drop links. Well, tried to. We're not making any progress. I thought I was able to loosen the bottom drop link bolt, but it's just spinning in place. It's not even loosening at all. I'll show you. That's one of the drop link bolts. If I put that in, it is spinning, it's loosening. Well, that's what I thought. But what it's doing is just spinning in place like so. It's not even loosening at all. So I think I'm gonna have to cut it off. That is the drop link off. We'll worry about that later. I'm just gonna take the bolt that holds this then, and then we should be good to go. Next to be removed are the 3 bolts at the top mounts. These didn't put up much of a fight as they weren't very rusty. That has definitely loosened it, but I am struggling to remove the suspension. It's like it's coming off, but I think I might need to remove the upper wishbone. And remove we did. The most difficult aspect of doing something you've never done before is doing something you've never done before. But the greatest reward is that you are learning as you go. Woo! One suspension out. Oh my god. That only took a couple of hours. I then did the same on the other side, and now having known what to do, I made quick work of it. I removed the lower suspension bolt, cut the drop link, removed the upper wishbone bolts, removed the 3 upper mount bolts, quick wiggle, and then front right hand side removed. Jeez. The next day, I got onto grinding out the drop links. This was a work on itself, I tell ya. Not like I've been here for hours. Look at the state of this. I think this has defeated me. At last, we can now move on to changing the springs. This should be an interesting one because I have never actually removed a spring off a suspension before, and we are using a tool which I have never used before as well. That is a spring compressor, which you can compress using a ratchet. I attached a spring compressor on each side of the spring and then slowly tightened to compress it. Using a spring compressor removes the built-up tension so we can remove the upper spring plate. If we didn't do this, the plate would shoot out and can potentially be very dangerous. But this looks and feels so sketchy. Whoa, that was a bit scary. So here are our two front springs, which is definitely a lot smaller than the stock springs, and it looks good in red as well, racing red. Everything just needs to be done in reverse order when putting the new springs back. I also bought a new rubber boot as the old one had seen better days. Now the best part, which is putting everything back. We got ourselves a new Droplink as well. I suppose we couldn't really reuse the old one, can we? Once all was loosely bolted back on, I shoved the jack underneath the joint to put a load on the suspension before I tightened everything. That is because if you tighten them at full drop, when you let it down, the bushings will have a constant twisting force applied and can wear it out fast. And we do it all over again, this time at the rear end. To access the upper strut bolts, we needed to remove the boot plastic trims and a metal panel protecting the fuel line. I am literally so dumb. I just found out to remove these Droplink bolts, you're supposed to use these open wrench and then use an Allen key to stop it from spinning. The reason why that keeps spinning is because it is a ball joint. If you don't put this Allen key on here, it'll just keep spinning and spinning. Here I am the whole time thinking it's lost its thread, and I have been cutting them off. Oh my god. That's it. Droplink off. Look at that. On top of removing the Droplink, I had to remove the lateral arms off as well to allow me room to wiggle out the suspension. A bolt then needs to be removed at the bottom of the strut, two at the top and one directly underneath. I also bought two new rear shock absorbers as well, as these needed changing as found on the MOT. In a way, we are hitting two birds with one stone. Spring replacement on the rear is pretty similar to the front, so that didn't take me too long. The only difficult bit when I was putting everything back was trying to insert the strut mount back into the knuckle, but using a jack helped me out a lot. As before, I put a load on the suspensions again before I tightened everything. Just look at how nice this car sits now. That massive wheel arch is now gone, but more importantly, the satisfaction in being able to say I did this all myself is unmatched. As they say, the beauty lies not only in the destination, but in the journey itself. I think that's all the time that we have for now. The car does look so much better now. It doesn't look as floaty as it was. I do think it needs a 10 to 15 millimeter spacers just to bring the wheel out a little bit and fill the wheel arch gap a little bit more. On the next video, the Mx-5 is going to go through some more transformation, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment. It would help the channel out a lot, and I shall see you on the next one.